right. Well, Auryn, welcome to the school bus. So great to have you here.
Yeah, cheers. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So to start off, for our audience, would love if you could talk a little bit about yourself, your background. What do you do?
Yeah, I guess I've been floating around the crypto Web3 space for a bunch of years now, coming up on a decade, maybe. Yeah, so I originally kind of fell down the rabbit hole in like 2013, poking around on Tor browser, kind of discovered Bitcoin, and from there, shortly after, I guess, discovered some of Vitalik's early posts about the idea of Ethereum, and the thing that kind of really captured my attention was the idea of DAOs. And so that is kind of what turned cryptocurrency from this like idle kind of curiosity into this just absolute obsession. And yeah, it's all kind of spiraled out of control from there. 2016, I co-founded the DAO Hub, which was basically just a forum for the DAOs community. For anyone that's not familiar with it, the DAO was this kind of first attempt at an on-chain organization, and it had a meteoric kind of growth where it did a really large kind of token sale, and then catastrophic collapse when a vulnerability was found in it, and then it ultimately ended up kind of resulting in the Ethereum Classic hard fork, and a whole bunch of drama in the Ethereum ecosystem. So this was kind of like my baptism of fire to like community management, community growth, all that kind of stuff. And then from there have just kind of moved around between a whole bunch of different projects and organizations. Currently working with Gnosis on Zodiac, which is this kind of standard for interoperable and composable DAO tooling, and just trying to kind of communicate that idea to the world, like it help the DAO ecosystem to play much more nicely together.
Dang, the original DAO, that sounds absolutely crazy.
That was crazy. Yeah. That got political too at a certain point with that fork, right? I mean, it's just the tribalism between Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. I mean, how did you navigate through that?
I mean, I don't know. I guess I was pretty biased in that I had a bunch of money in the DAO, and so I was financially incentivized to stick with the fork that ended up being kind of the canonical Ethereum chain anyway. But I guess from a political point of view, like if I put my bias aside, I think I my understanding of blockchains in general is that their kind of last fallback is always going to be social consensus, right? And so there's a lot of people that really kind of buy heavily into this idea of kind of code is law in the context of blockchains. And I think that's kind of like, I don't know, naive to a certain extent, and in reality it's this kind of like soft law thing. Really, it's always going to fall back to some kind of social consensus. If something that goes kind of egregiously like wrong enough, then there's always this option to hard fork and kind of change state arbitrarily. And it's like, I think it's absolutely a last resort. It's not something that should be done frequently or with any kind of regularity. But I think there are times when it's necessary, either in again super rare cases like the DAO, but then I mean other cases are just for progress, to make sure that the chain can continue to develop. And so I think like that's a really key differentiator between Ethereum and something like Bitcoin, as Ethereum is willing to periodically make hard forks just to continue to improve the network.
Yeah, I think that the social consensus layer is so important and so undervalued. I think it seems like there's a lot of people in the DAO space that are really just all in on like, okay, the code will solve everything, but we've been so deep in community and social for so long that like the importance of actually building things that are human and rely on like community and human sense-making processes is can be overvalued.
Yeah, and I feel like it's like culture too. I mean, I feel like we're just seeing it at ETH Denver, just the openness to try new things, try different approaches. I think even just the conversations we've been having, people are approaching similar problems with like their own like terminology almost, right? We were talking about like knowledge platforms, and the way we were interpreting it within Sapien was like the information layer. So it's really interesting that sometimes like you just gotta like define the words, but you really realize people are working on the same problem, just articulating in different ways.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Right.
with that, the human versus the technical, I'm wondering like where are there any clear-cut boundaries that you see, like the boundary between social consensus and the code is here for any particular.
Ooh, what do you
areas.
mean? As in, like, particular
Like
types?
you're building DAO tooling, like how deep into the tooling do you get before you realize like, okay, this should actually be solved by like social consensus?
I mean, I think I don't know. It's maybe even a little bit circular there, and that like the DAO tooling is usually a way of enabling some kind of social consensus. It's tooling that a group of people are going to interact with in order to come to consensus on how to do things, on what decisions they want to collectively make for this organization they've created. And so I think we're really just talking about kind of the same set of problems at different layers in the stack.
Yeah.
Has Zodiac been looking a bit into like social recovery wallets and how to actually?
I mean, that's a little bit, I think, out of scope for Zodiac. It's definitely something that's intriguing for the safe in general. There's some really interesting options for it, but yeah, nothing that's been implemented by the safe team yet. I mean, I guess we could implement that as a module, but it's not. I guess it's not as important in the context of a DAO, or at least it's maybe not. So like you would think about social recovery usually when we're talking about like wallets that an individual owns, and wanting to kind of create a route for that individual to recover it if they lose their keys. In the context of a DAO, where you have this huge population of people, this huge membership, ideally, of participants that should have control of it, then the kind of need for recovery would really only be in the case of like whatever mechanism they're using to make decisions kind of failing for some reason. And yeah, I'd say in the vast majority of cases that's kind of redundant. But there is cases where you might want some kind of like fallback mechanism or some kind of backstop. And so usually that would be handled just by like the multi-sig portion of the safe if you were doing this in a kind of Zodiac style setup.
Yeah, that I think you're saying it's like a fallback. I think it's interesting. It's a sort of an opinionated stance, like, okay, that there is an absence of that group at the center of it, but I think that the way we're thinking at it and approaching it is like, okay, that is, a lot of organizations want that sort of more structure, more hierarchy, like with different layers, right? So there's the DAO layer that brings it out to the total public, but there may be an inner group of people that has some control that's using a multi-sig to take some specific set of actions. I'm curious if you've seen anything like that, any structures.
Yeah, so I mean, like we think about one of the things I think Zodiac enables really nicely is kind of progressive decentralization, right? So you might start off with a safe multi-sig, maybe it's like 2 of 3 or 3 of 5 or something like that, like a small group of kind of initiators who kind of start this project. Then, next step might be to add some kind of signaling mechanism for the community. So a kind of really common choice for that is spinning up a snapshot instance. Then the signaling mechanism, at some point you might want to say, okay, now let's give the community control over the safe, kind of autonomous control, so they don't need the multi-sig signers to actually execute anything. At that point, one option is to plug in a reality module and kind of connect up snapshot and the safe, or alternatively you could plug in just about any other DAO framework. So you could plug in, we did it the other day with a Open Zeppelin governor on Tally. We've done it with Moloch, we've done it with actually we haven't done it with Aragon yet, but yeah, so we've done it with reality, with governor, and with Moloch. And yeah, the idea there is just to actually now have kind of autonomous control over the safe from the kind of community, but you still have the multi-sig signers kind of operating in parallel, so they kind of both can control the same safe at the same time. And so because the multi-sig signers can kind of presumably act faster than the DAO, they still have kind of, I think, ultimate control over it. Like they can always remove the DAO if they want. They can disable it as a module. And so this is like a nice kind of half step where they can give autonomous control, but know that they've got an opportunity to kind of revoke it if something malicious starts coming through. Your kind of next step there might be to, once you're confident that the community kind of can operate well using whatever DAO tooling they've chosen, then you might restrict the scope of what the multi-sig signers can do. So rather than having unlimited scope to do whatever they want, you might restrict it so they can just call a function to veto transactions coming through from whatever your DAO process is. So they have this ability to kind of stop things but not start things.
Yeah, it's interesting because, like, just thinking about it, it sounds like, we're sort of designing the checks and balances in a governance, right? There's the core group, the smaller group that's like whatever has higher executive authority than the people, and you have to build in some checks and balances.
And I was reading a very interesting thread with Elad. It was a little bit old, but like 2020. But he was basically talking about how it's not like the token-based governance is good, but it's still a little bit flawed. We actually need to put people in positions where you know who's like adding what value to a community, right? And that's kind of the way we've been looking at the passport, right? Because I think those like specific functions that you mentioned, right? I don't know if the average person would be able to be like, oh, I have control over this particular method, but if they have a certain title or stamp within their community, I think that just is more like a human way to sort of structure that role-based access control.
I mean, so that's an interface problem, right? Like, so it's just a matter of presenting those things in a way that's kind of digestible by regular humans, as opposed to just ABI functions. But I definitely agree with that. There's a great opportunity to make that much more accessible. The kind of the last step in that kind of progressive decentralization journey is obviously just like removing the signers altogether, or maybe one kind of potential last step is just removing them altogether. I think the other thing that you mentioned there is like token voting as a is imperfect, and I 100% agree. It's really imperfect. I think the reason that it's gotten as popular as it has is maybe there's kind of two reasons. One is it's just cheap Sybil resistance. Because getting more influence costs more money. You get really strong, you get reasonably strong kind of Sybil resistance out of that, which is beneficial. The other thing that's the other reason I think it's popular is just because it replicates kind of a shareholder vote weight kind of model. The big issue that I think most DAOs kind of face, though, once they get beyond some certain scale, is that many haven't found kind of effective ways to replicate the kind of internal delegation that happens in a more traditional organization. Like, you don't ask all of the shareholders to vote on every single thing that happens, but that's still very much the pattern in a lot of DAOs. Like, everything the DAO wants to do, you have to do a 2-week proposal, and everyone has to vote, and it takes forever to get anything done.
That's why I think you can't really remove the signers at the end of the day, and I think that's sort of a flawed trajectory to go down, because you lose so much complexity when you're like forced to like have this like shareholder voting model when it's just like totally democratic, right? Like,
I disagree with that. I think like the solution isn't necessarily to say, okay, we need some trusted group that just has total authority over the thing. I think probably the better solution is to do similar to, not throw out everything from traditional organizations, right? Like a traditional organization, you might have like a board who is kind of has a fiduciary responsibility to do the best thing for the stakeholders, right? For the shareholders. But that is kind of a proxy for essentially shareholders having the kind of ultimate say, right? So in a DAO analog to this, you would have token holders, shareholders, stakeholders, whatever, are essentially the top level. They are the board in this organization. And there's no reason that the rest of the organization can't take on a similar kind of internal hierarchy to what you would have in a more traditional organization. So you might break it up into departments. You might allocate budget to departments that have totally different decision-making logic than the top level. The top level doesn't need to make every single decision. It should eventually be more concerned with higher level decisions over a longer time frame.
It seems like the making sure that the top group, the signers or whoever it is, doesn't have all the power is important, because the separation of power is the thing that like lends itself to the creation of more complex decision-making processes.
Right.
Have
When
you-
the right
have-
incentives are in place.
Have you seen some of these examples of like protocols that are trying to do this, where you get different titles within different DAOs? Because I do think that's important for how DAOs will start interacting with each other, right? It's like, how do we actually? Because right now we're looking at Discord roles, right? And that's arbitrary as hell. No one actually knows how they're given, what do you need to do to actually get that role. But is there some standardization that you see? Because that's kind of the idea we're pushing for with the passport as well, right? Like there needs to be some standard thing that you can walk around with and show off that, hey, these are my titles, these are what I've contributed to different communities, and make it easy for people to make sense, like, oh, this guy has contributed a lot to this community.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm not aware of any like standard ways to do this yet. I think it's probably well and truly too early to like ossify any standards around and the best ways to do this. But I also think like it's important to think about the way that this thing's actually being used. So like the kind of assignment of Discord roles is a very different responsibility to the assignment of like permissions to make a contract do something. And so there's a kind of social layer categorization or roles. I think that again, it's just a different problem. I guess like most of my focus is on the other side of that, where we're thinking about like how do we think about what mechanisms allow which people to kind of trigger this DAO to do things, and how do we do that in a way that makes the DAO kind of as efficient as possible.
Yeah. It's so interesting because we're actually looking at it from the other side. Like you have a title, so therefore you must have certain authority to do certain signatures with an allocation of funds, whatever it might be, as it is in traditional orgs, as you've been saying, right? Like the marketing department might have a budget of 100,000, and like it's their discretion how they want to spend that. But I do think like we still need to know that those are the people that are in the marketing department, and that this is the authorities that they have. Right, I think that would make it easier as like just an interface for people to enter this space, because I think that's ultimately what we want. Right?
And to convert over existing structures, because I think the end game is clearly like, okay, corporations are an old way of doing this that are sort of obsoleted by DAOs in their ultimate form, but we need to like encapsulate and capture like the value of the structure that they provide.
Right. And a lot of people talk about like this idea of DAOs making corporations obsolete, and I'm not sure I agree with that either. I think there's a place in the world for a huge diversity of different organization types, and in particular, I think there's a whole class of problem sets that DAOs are just going to be horrible at coordinating around. In particular, anything that requires secrecy. Like if your business model is built around the ability for you to contain information.
Oh, this is...
then I think DAOs are just going to be horrible at it by nature.
This is a good point. This is where we like the terminology, like why we're talking about what we're doing is not necessarily like a DAO, but more properly like a tribe that does have takes into account like the DAO layer and this like the various trusted hierarchies that have the ability to have secrecy and information sharing.
Yeah, and I mean this is where we could easily see ZK snarks like again like being essential to making DAOs that can preserve privacy and secrecy to some extent. But I'm curious, like where have you seen that fail?
Well, so I think like there's two sides to this. One is the technical side of like trying to put information in a public space without it being publicly visible. But the other is just the social side of it, where if you're essentially if your DAO is a huge collection of essentially uncoordinated actors, then even if you are able to kind of shield that information from the outside world, I think there's a really high chance that it just leaks anyway. Like if you've got a whole bunch of people participating in something with no kind of contractual bounds, no kind of essentially like that, there's a really strong incentive for them to front run the things that their DAO is doing. If it's secret to the outside world that the DAO is about to make this trade, then there's a really strong incentive from someone inside the organization to front run that trade.
Right.
And so if you're dealing with pseudonymous people interacting online, you have no idea who they are in real life and no like opportunity for recourse, then it's almost certain that information leaks and someone acts on it.
That's why the lawyer DAO is floating around in the metaverse too. In situations like that, who you're going to call, right? I mean, that's insider trading too.
Once
right?
your pseudonymous like status and social consequences match like real world, then maybe that's one thing that'll help. I'm curious, Auryn, if you've seen any like collaboration between DAOs or how you see that progressing. If there are any interesting ideas of how DAOs can come together.
Yeah, I mean, the most interesting recent example of this I saw was the cow DAO spinning out of the Gnosis DAO, which I think this is maybe the first example of this, the first time this has happened, but like where you had one DAO make a proposal to literally, like in this proposal we had this huge transaction payload to spin up a safe, spin up the token for the cow DAO, spin up the ENS name and the snapshot space, and like literally everything, bridge a bunch of tokens over to Gnosis chain and distribute tokens, or kind of put up the token claim contracts and all that kind of stuff. So this huge payload of transactions passed in a proposal by a DAO to basically create another DAO, to spawn another DAO. Which was unreal. I like I said, I'm not aware of something else like that, but I'm sure that it'll be a pattern that more DAOs follow.
Yeah. It's something like hierarchies, right? That's something that inspired us early. Dr. Mahala's work on that, and I think that one of the interesting parts is the structures that emerge, right? Like, I think spinning out is one thing, and it's kind of akin to the fork that we were talking about earlier. But what's the sort of like the economic piece of this, right? I think that like how do you actually create structures that are like a win-win economy? That's something that we've obviously thought about, and we're proposing a token standard for this, right? But have you seen some sort of automation that's going on between DAOs, like investing into each other, or being able to easily take a stake in individual community members even?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not aware of anything outside of what you guys are working on for that. I mean, in the case of the cow DAO and the Gnosis DAO, there's obviously each of them now has a really strong stake in each other by virtue of them both holding each other's tokens,
right,
and kind of being stakeholders in each other's ecosystems.
Yeah, that's what I'm really interested about, right? Because I think that's how you actually stitch this new digital economy. It's not going to happen in isolation, like, your own Discord server and you got your own token, cool. But where does it all like come together, and how do I see that? Like, what's the mapping there? Like, you can see it with the stock market, you can see ETFs, you can see who's holding what. But, I think there needs to be a little bit more transparency there too.
Well, I think it's probably much more transparent in the DAO space than anywhere else. It's that maybe the interfaces are less mature, right? Like, I mean, the data is all there. It's out there on chain. You can see it. You can see who holds every token. You can go and spin up a Dune dashboard really quickly to go and figure out which addresses are the biggest holders of which tokens and stuff like that. So I think the transparency isn't the issue. It's just more maturity of the interfaces.
Yeah.
So I know Auryn, one sort of cause that you're really passionate about is UBI. I'm curious if you've seen any since we last spoke, some recent developments on in that space.
Circle's UBI is I think planning to make a bit of a comeback at some point soon, which will be really interesting. I don't know a ton of details about it, but I know they are. They've been working on some cool stuff for the last 6-8 months. And then outside of that, nothing all that recent. I mean, the UBI project, Proof of Humanity project, I think is also really interesting. But I think it's a really interesting space that's still finding its feet for sure.
I'm curious, Auryn, if you have a picture of like the long-term vision of this, like 20, 50 years out, like what does the future look like when the world is ruled by DAOs, when they're everywhere?
I don't know. I'm not sure. Hopefully better. Hopefully, I think like with any technology, there's the potential for it to be kind of co-opted and used in some pretty awful ways. So I very much hope it's kind of a liberating force for a lot of people all over the world, particularly in places where they maybe don't have as kind of trivial access to a stable legal environment as we do here. I think like that's the impact that I'd really love to see. It's just it being a way for people who are otherwise prevented from kind of using that, or kind of otherwise don't have access to stable organizations, stable banking, and the ability to collectively build things because of their inability to access those kind of financial primitives.
Yeah, it's so powerful, and just the opportunity for groups that have affinity, like to invest in each other. I think we're going to see so many amazing things emerge out of these places that aren't yet fully into the internet, into crypto, and I would love to invest in those projects or be a part of helping them come to fruition. So really excited for what the future brings.
Yeah, and that's ultimately where we're driving with the digital nation, right? To build this republic of DAOs, so people actually have the opportunity to choose, where they want to contribute, and there's still some sort of, unified network at the end of the day, right? And an experience that doesn't require people to, just know how to sign transactions and at the low level, right? I think that's going to be a barrier for a lot of people, and that's one of my something that drives me every day, right? It's how do we make this so that it's as easy for my mom to get it or my dad to get it. So
yeah. I mean, that's, I don't know, the key management and all that kind of stuff is such an issue, and I think, I don't know, hopefully we can get it to a point where it's friendly for just about anyone to use. I'm a bit jaded there, and probably think that it may just be a bit of a generational thing. It may end up taking a solid generation of people kind of before you see really mainstream kind of everyday adoption, just because there's a whole bunch of concepts that are just and kind of practices that are just so far outside of what people are used to dealing with that it's just people are just going to be unwilling to or unable to actually participate. And I say that obviously being someone who's really, really bullish on the space as a whole and sees the kind of potential for it. But I also say that as someone who, has been in it for close to a decade and has been trying to encourage people to come down the rabbit hole with me all this time, and people who have seen the positive outcomes it's had for me and said, oh, I should have gotten into it when you did, I should have gotten into it when you told me about it, and had kind of every opportunity to do it but have not because it's hard.
Well, I mean, I think that's always the case with early tech, right? I mean, no one's sitting there a lot of people just don't understand SSL, but they need the security on their website, and there's all these great interfaces, HTTPS and email, right? Another one, but I think that's where it's heading. I think it's a big cultural shift too, actually, because people need to be aware of the power and responsibility of doing.
Right. I mean, self-custody is scary.
Yeah.
Most people don't want that responsibility.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think multi-sigs are so powerful, where you can delegate that. You delegate the responsibility to someone you trust.
Yeah, I do think there's a really great opportunity for someone to enter the space and basically take on that, as in provide a wallet where, say, I don't know, it could be, if it's a multi-sig, it could be 2 out of 3. The user essentially controls 2 keys. One is their kind of everyday key. One is some kind of something that's in more like a cold storage key, and then have a third key on there that's some service provider. And then you could get most of the way to a really kind of bank credit card user experience with that type of setup, where essentially user initiates a transaction, and then this service is basically monitoring those transactions to make sure they're not doing anything stupid, make sure they're not about to give all their tokens away or give all their money away or give access to something they shouldn't, in the same way that when you swipe your credit card, your credit card company does some kind of anti-fraud analytics on that before they approve it. I do think there's a really interesting opportunity there for something that's kind of a hybrid model. It's still self-custodial, but you have someone kind of looking over your shoulder, helping you out with that.
Nice.
Yeah, seems really promising.
So many great products just coming out of these chats. You listening? That's another one to build. All right. Oh man. So cool. We only have a couple minutes left, so just curious about your historical pick, Auryn.
Yeah.
You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So I went with Galileo. Mainly because of their, I don't know, tie-in to a certain extent with Zodiac and the kind of celestial bodies and all that kind of thing. And so, just wanted to. I wanted to pick a scientist. And kind of went through a whole list of different scientists that I thought would be interesting picks, and then that one seemed like a really great one, just because he's his inventions and his kind of work is a large part of kind of our modern understanding of the universe and the celestial bodies.
And he wasn't afraid to speak the truth. Whatever the consequence might be, it doesn't fucking matter. He's gonna say what's on his mind, and I think we need more people like that. We need more bold
Right.
voices.
Yeah.
Now more than ever.
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks for taking the time, Auryn, to hop on the school bus. It's been a pleasure. It's been
Yeah,
great.
no worries. Thanks for having me. This is it's a really cool setup. I'm loving the environment. It was it fits the like Web3 ethos perfectly. You know, it's weird. Keep
yeah.
Ethereum weird.
Yeah.
100%.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks. Appreciate it.